Yo, what's up, y'all? Kyle here, and today I wanted to take a look at some of the licensed games in my collection. Now, I know we've done other videos in the past on licensed releases like the Stallone games, as well as the Austin Powers and the Wayne's World games, but I picked out just a random smattering here today of a bunch of licensed games in my collection, and I find these to be some of the strangest licensed games in my collection. So, without any further ado, guys, let's get into it. And I figure for today's video, it makes more sense than anything to start with the PlayStation 2. And I got 5 games here that are all quite strange in their own right, and obviously in the 6th gen, PS2 crushed it, sold over 100 million units. A lot of publishers want to take advantage of the large install base and try and get people enticed with some pre-existing IPs that they knew about and sell them games like based on Aqua Teen Hunger Force here. This is Aqua Teen Hunger Force Zombie Ninja Pro-Am. Now, this is a PS2 exclusive. This did not show up on other platforms. I believe this was a 2007 release, so a little bit late into the PS2 lifespan. This is a very strange game. Actually, as the title would suggest, you do quite a bit of golfing in this game, and the golfing is actually pretty competent. It's not going to blow your socks off. It's definitely not the best golf game I've ever played, but it's pretty decent. But to mix up this game and to add some spice and some flair, they actually, in addition to the golfing, between strokes, you actually walk up the green, and there are some beat 'em up sequences, essentially what it is, and you're attacking all these monsters coming out from the course and basically fighting your way through hordes to get to your ball to take the next shot. And then breaking up the different holes, you do get some golf cart racing sequences as well. So this game is all over the place. It's very interesting as kind of a curiosity more than anything. I think if you're looking to play a game that has solid gameplay, this probably is a pass. But if you're a fan of the franchise Aqua Teen and you want something that's a little weird and obscure, this was also one of the first games I ever streamed over on Twitch. More than 4 years ago at this point. It makes me feel old, but yeah, this one was fun to stream the once. I don't know if I recommend it to everybody, but it is for sure very strange. Next up here is one that you probably wouldn't think is all that weird, but I have a pretty good argument, I think, and that is the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Obviously, this came out to coincide with the film of the same name, and, you know, releasing a game alongside the movie. You know, I'm sure a lot of parents took their kids to see this and went, you know, let's buy him the video game too. Billy's got a PS2. Weirdly enough, this is not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. Actually, it's pretty competent, albeit maybe a little by the books, a little boring. But what you'll notice in this gameplay footage is that the gameplay mechanics actually look quite familiar, and that is because this is developed by Traveler's Tales, and this came out close to the first couple Lego Star Wars games by them. Yeah, this is essentially the Lego game formula reskinned to be a Chronicles of Narnia game without the Lego license. Very strange, very fascinating, very odd. But yeah, I guess Traveler's Tales was like, hey, we got a winning formula here, which they have proven in the subsequent years, right? Those Lego games just churn money. So they basically took that engine and made themselves a little movie license game to make some extra dough. And I don't necessarily recommend it, but I thought it was interesting for that reason. So Chronicles of Narnia by Traveler's Tales, basically a Lego game in disguise. The more you know. Next up here, we've got one that is a bit notorious in my circles, and that is a Crazy Frog Arcade Racer. Now, this one is obviously strange for many reasons, including the phenomenon that was the Crazy Frog. For a while there in the mid-2000s, you really could not get away from hearing this bastard. I gotta say, the game itself is actually kind of fun, and I guess it's not super strange that they would have gone with an arcade racing game, considering the music videos that accompanied like Axel F and stuff. You know, there was some racing themes in those videos, so that alone is not the strangest thing. It is weird in the fact that it did get a US release, and they just called it Crazy Frog Arcade Racer. There actually is a first game that came out in Europe. This is actually technically the second game, and it is quite a bit better. I would say if you are interested for whatever reason in playing a Crazy Frog racing game, this is probably the one to go with. If you're in Europe, get the second one. It's basically this game. The first one is just a little too janky for its own good. It has a lot of technical issues and bugs and weird collision, and not to say that this game is safe from any and all of those things, but it is certainly a more polished experience, and I do kind of have fun with this one. Luckily, it's pretty cheap and just a fun one to have in the PS2 collection. Next up here, we got Jackass the game for PS2. Now, this is a game that also came out on PSP, as well as there's a DS version that is probably pretty significantly different, but I think the PSP and PS2 versions are nearly identical. We have a kind of mini game compilation with this one. Obviously, Jackass, the franchise, was huge during the mid-2000s. I believe this game came out in 2007, and it was definitely riding off the success of the IP. And honestly, this does a decent job replicating the feel and the vibe of the show. You get a ton of different mini games in this compilation, most of which are actually pretty funny. You get a nice, decent variety here. Most of them are decently engaging. There are a few that do feel a little phoned in. Definitely not all the mini games here are created equal, but you do also have appearances from a lot of the original cast. You know, you got Steve-O and Wee Man, and you know, the whole cast is there. It's a fun little romp. It's only a few hours long. Honestly, it's a better game than you'd probably expect, but it doesn't change the fact that it is a pretty strange release of the PS2 library. And to round out our PS2 games here, we've got Star Wars Super Bombad Racing, and I think the first thing that people notice when they look at this game are the weird, like, chibi style bobblehead artwork for the characters here. I think that turned a lot of people off. This game does look very kiddie. In fact, it was done by the Lucas Learning branch of LucasArts, which was kind of like the kids educational branch. To say that this is educational at all would be wrong, but it is strictly basically a kart racing game. But there are some pretty unique elements to this one. I got quite involved in this game for a while there. I was speedrunning it at one point. It's really actually a pretty good racing game if you kind of drop any preconceived notions you have of the visuals here. It's not the prettiest looking game, but I gotta say the actual mechanics are quite fun. Obviously, you're in these little hovercraft. What's cool is there is some light, like, platforming elements. You can actually jump in these hovercraft and basically do like little shortcuts, and there's quite a pretty awesome boost system as well. So you get some nice jump boosts. There are some fun mechanics here that keep it pretty engaging. You know, there's only maybe 9 or 10 tracks. It's not a whole lot of content in the grand scheme of things, but I do find myself coming back to this one. I do feel like this one really got a bashing on by the Star Wars fan base, maybe a little unfairly. I enjoy this one quite a bit. Moving on to my beloved, the 3DO, we've got Jurassic Park Interactive. Now, this is one that is fascinating for many reasons. As many of us know, Jurassic Park was huge in the early 90s. Almost every console under the sun got a version of Jurassic Park, and many of them are actually unique games. If you look at the Genesis, Super Nintendo, even PCs of the era, I mean, you name it, the list goes on and on. Like, a lot of these consoles had Jurassic Park games, and they were almost always unique games, with a few exceptions, but this one is no exception. This is a unique game designed and developed exclusively for the 3DO. It is another one of those games, kind of like Demo Man, that to me solidifies why I love this console so much. This is like early 90s multimedia FMV entertainment experience wrapped into one package. It feels really more than anything like a tech demo for the 3DO, but I kind of love that it came out that way. You get a few main different gameplay styles in this. There is a Jeep driving mini game where you're driving away from the T-Rex. It's incredibly 3DO. I mean, it's just a lot of 2D sprites that are kind of doing this fake feigned 3D. There's also a taser mini game where you're tasering velociraptors and trying to clear them from the screen in the jungle. There is also actually a first-person sequence where you are running away from one of the dinosaurs. I have to come clean. I have probably gotten jump scared by that sequence more times than I'd like to admit. Where the hell is he? Oh, fuck! But it's quite interesting, and it goes to show like what the 3DO was trying to do and maybe what it was capable of. I don't know if this really showed and harnessed the full power. We may never know, but this is a really fun one that if you've never seen before, it's quite the riot. Moving up chronologically onto PS1 now, we've got the Flintstones Bedrock Bowling, and if you've been a longtime viewer of my Twitch streams or my channel, You probably are pretty familiar with this one, but I had to include this in this strange list because this is a very strange Flintstones game. And while it says it's a bowling game and technically you are knocking pins down, this is really more like a bobsledding game. Basically, the idea is that Gizmo has created these lanes that you go down, and he's given you these like half hollowed out rocks to slide down like a bobsled. The pins are actually scattered along the courses, and so while you're bobsledding your way down, you're actually hitting these different pins and, you know, trying to still get a strike by the end of the lane. But it is a very odd game, and I honestly have trouble explaining how strange this game is because I've played it so much. Like, I've done some speed runs of it. I really like this game a lot. I've played it quite a bit, so I'm a little desensitized to how just freaking weird it is, but hopefully the gameplay does you some justice. Yeah, no, it's a fun one. I definitely recommend checking it out if you're a PS1 fan and you like the weird, off the beaten path kind of games. It's still a very cheap game, and the Flintstones charm goes a long way. Next up, we have another kind of strange exclusive, and this was actually a launch title for the original Xbox, if you can believe that, and it's a pretty well-known character. I think you guys are gonna laugh when you see this. We've got Shrek for the OG Xbox, and this actually did later get a release on GameCube as Shrek Extra Large, with some additional content and some reworking for the GameCube, but if you wanted it back when it came out, you got it on the OG Xbox, and it proudly proclaims Todd McFarlane's involvement, which is strange enough, but also the fact that this was done by DICE. Yeah, like Battlefield DICE. Yeah, they developed this. And this is essentially kind of a, I'm not gonna say open world action adventure game, but it is essentially a third-person action adventure game, mission-based, kind of in the vein of like a Mario 64, you know, any of those early 3D platformers. It has a lot in common with those, although this one is very strange. The movement, you'll notice right away, is very wild and very quick, actually. It's quite satisfying to play once you kind of get into it. But yeah, he moves like a madman. You're throwing stuff and kicking stuff, and it's a lot of fun. But it's also a pretty flawed game at the end of the day. I actually have finished everything in this game except for the final stage. It is one of the toughest last levels I think I've ever tried to play in a 3D platformer, and that's not something I say lightly. It is quite a difficult little game by the end, but honestly, pretty fun for what it is, and an interesting curio in the Xbox launch lineup. You know, if you weren't getting a Halo, there was a good chance you might get Shrek. Speaking of weird licensed games, did you ever imagine that there would be a Napoleon Dynamite game? Yes, this is for the PSP. There is also a DS version that is a different game. This is a mini-game compilation, once again, very much in the style of Jackass, which we saw earlier. Just throw a whole bunch of mini-games at the wall that are vaguely to do with the film, package it up nice and neat, and throw it on the PSP and call it a day. You know, honestly, this reminds me of like something you would have seen on like Newgrounds back in the day. It has a very Flash animation kind of feel to it. But honestly, for what it is, for being a dirt cheap PSP game, I've played worse. It's quite a bit of fun, actually. I have fond memories of streaming this. You know, while I don't necessarily recommend it to everybody, if you're looking for another kind of strange license tie-in and you want to fill out that PSP collection with some jank garbo, you know, you could do worse than Napoleon Dynamite. And lastly here, I actually have a PC game, which I feel very lucky to own because it's actually a kind of a rare multi-pack. I'm mainly going to be focusing on one of the games, but we've got the 3-in-1 SpongeBob SquarePants PC pack, and this is interesting for a few reasons. First of all, you'll notice there are some games that shared some console releases, but this was during the era when THQ was outsourcing a lot of their game development for the PC to separate developers than would be for the consoles. So the versions of Battle for Bikini Bottom and Lights Camera Pants are actually entirely different. But the main game I want to talk about here is the PC exclusive that is called SpongeBob SquarePants Employee of the Month. This is actually one that I had as a kid, and it's quite a fun little point-and-click adventure game. It's actually quite competent. It's a lot of fun. It's very faithful to the source material in the show. It feels almost like a lost episode. It's extremely well done. I love the visual style of it and the aesthetics, but easily the weirdest part about this game in general is the cutscenes. For some reason, they went with 3D rendering for these cutscenes, and it's like a very janky, poorly done 3D render. here. The character models just look strange. The animation is not very well done at all. They just feel so out of place in relation to the rest of this game. It's unfortunate because otherwise the game actually feels quite polished and very complete, but the cutscenes are definitely the Achilles heel and they stick out like a sore thumb. So for that reason alone, I think Employee of the Month is very strange. Otherwise, it's a really great game, and if you're at all a fan of the SpongeBob franchise and you like point and click adventures, it's an easy recommend, but them cutscenes, they are very strange. So there you go, guys. That does it for my 10 strangest licensed games in my collection. I think I picked out some pretty good weird ones here for a multitude of different reasons. I didn't necessarily just want to go with all shock value. I think there were some really interesting bits of insight and little nuggets of gaming history, which is what I'm always here for. And so thank you guys for watching. I would love to hear down in the comments below, what are some of the strangest licensed games that you've personally played? Did I miss anything major? I probably did. I'm limited to what I got here. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, take care, everybody. For a while there in the mid-2000s, you really could not get away from hearing this bastard.